This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Jack Morrone. Jack, welcome. It's nice to have you with us tonight. Now, there are a lot of things we can talk about. You've lived in Macon, Georgia for 38 years. Is that correct?
That's correct. We moved here from Tampa, Florida.
Now, you mentioned earlier your connection with turkeys.
Yes.
Maybe you could. Well, we're going to go into some interesting conversation tonight, but let's start out with how you got entangled with turkeys.
That's easy. When I moved to Macon, I had two business partners, and we were in the boat and camper business.
Yes.
And the company just got to the point where it was better for me to go into business for myself.
Yes.
So my wife and I decided that we wanted to stay in Macon.
Yes.
So we opened up the Morrone company.
Yes.
And it had nothing to do. We had an office, a building,
Yes.
a secretary, and my secretary said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know, but we'll
Yes.
figure it out.
Yes.
So we started off, and John McNeil, a local business salesman,
Yes.
came to me and said, there's a guy down the street that has a business for sale that makes fish cookers.
Yes.
And I said, I don't know the first thing about that. I'm from West Virginia.
Yes, there you go.
And so I went down and looked at it. The books looked good, and it looked like it made sense. So
Yes.
I bought the company.
Yes.
And operated it from a small business till the point where another gentleman from Macon came in one day and said that he'd been to New Orleans and that they were using a great big barrel and oil to fry a turkey in a wood fire, and that somebody should figure
Yes,
out how
yes,
to do this
yes,
with a
yes,
propane
yes,
stove.
Yes.
So I went to my wife, who was my business partner, and I said, we can do this. We can
Yes.
figure out.
Right.
So we put the components together, went to the Chicago hardware show, and introduced the first turkey fryer. And 2.3 million cookers later.
So you manufactured millions of turkey cookers.
That
turkey
is
fries
correct.
Right here in Macon, Georgia. Is that
Right
correct?
here in South Macon.
That's a pretty good story.
Yeah, we had 58 employees.
Yes.
And after we started working 3 shifts a day,
Yes.
we couldn't produce anymore. So then we started moving the business offshore to
Yeah.
Taiwan, and then Hong Kong, and then to China, and
Wow.
then to India.
Did you travel over there?
We did. Every year we had to go over to the factories where we bought the stainless steel in India. We made pots and burners in Taiwan. We made gas regulators in Taiwan.
How did you find that? I mean, trying to do overseas business, was that a difficult thing? I mean, how tough was that to
if you
deal
can imagine, in 1983, that was very difficult because China wasn't open at that
Yes,
time.
yes.
My wife and I went into China on a tourist visa.
Oh, you did?
And we went to a hotel and checked in, and I went to the concierge and I said, I would like to see if there's anybody here that would have a business contact for us to do business
Okay,
in
all right.
China.
Okay, all right, let's just stop for a second. Stop. Okay, I don't think you have your thing on here. So, okay, Brad, are we getting okay sound?
I didn't know I was.
Well, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? You're okay with that?
I'll edit this out.
We'll just edit it out. Let's be sure is the sound okay everywhere?
Yes, sir. It was sounding fine once I boosted it.
Okay, all right. Just make sure we're getting okay sound here, and we'll just keep going. We'll
I didn't.
You're fine. I noticed, I was like, oh, he didn't have his mic on, but then I was going to stop it myself, but once I boosted it, it sounded fine.
Okay, let's just put that on you. We'll keep
There
talking
you go,
about
sir.
overseas. They'll edit this out, so we'll
Yeah.
just keep going, no problem. That's one of the things we can do, whatever here. Okay, ready?
It's nice you can stop.
Okay, well, Jack, shall we just continue our conversation here? You're discussing about how difficult it was to have an overseas business. I mean, in the 1980s, what was that like to go over to?
Well, it was a hit and miss.
Yes.
We would go to China and to
You went
Taiwan,
to mainland China.
Mainland China.
Wow.
And we went in on a tourist visa.
Yes.
And we checked into the Sheraton Hotel, and in the lobby was Emmett and Edwina Barnes.
Well, I
Of all the
hesitate to
places in
imagine
the
why
world,
they would be there, but
They were there buying things for their house in Shirley Hills.
okay, great.
Which
Okay.
was amazing to be
I see.
halfway around the
Sure,
world
that
and to run into them.
That was quite a surprise, I'm sure. So you how did
Anyhow,
you-
we made connections, and we started going back twice a year in the beginning to the different places. And as we'd find new sources, we'd go to new places, and some were big hits and some were losers.
Yes. Well, now, did you have help from the U.S. government in doing this, or did you have any import-export? You did this all by yourself?
All
Is
by
that-
ourselves, my wife and me.
You had no contacts? I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, you just, in India, how do you start a business in India? I mean, just go.
That is an amazement. We flew to New Delhi,
Yes,
and I had the name of a man in New Delhi, and we met at the airport, and he had, in those days, they had directories of who were the stainless steel pot manufacturers,
Yes.
and his name was in there. And so
Yes.
he met us at the airport. We went out to his factory
yes,
and looked at the quality and decided that, of course, he could make the cookware for us.
yes.
And that's how it began.
Well, now, did you find dishonest people in your travels? I mean, it appeared to me that often just coming in like that, there might be without
Well,
any,
they
could
were
be some trouble. there.
Actually, they were extremely honest. The biggest problem was they couldn't always do what they said they could do.
Yes, yes.
They couldn't meet the quantities that I needed
Right,
and
well.
meet them on time.
Wow.
And so we had problems with that, with port issues. One year, I had 104,000 cookers for Lowe's on the water
Yes.
coming in from China. And in San Francisco and LA, they decided to have a strike.
Yes.
And the cookers sat there from September the 15th
Yes.
to January the 5th, so that I missed Thanksgiving and Christmas. And they delivered 104,000 cookers
That's a lot of cookers.
to my warehouse after the season was over.
Well, that's a pretty good story. I mean, the cook, I'm trying to think about turkeys, my knowledge of turkeys. So a fried turkey is different than a Thanksgiving turkey, or is it the same thing, or
Well, I like to think it's better
it's better?
because of the way that it's cooked. When you immerse a whole turkey in hot oil,
Yes.
the hot oil sears the exterior
Right.
of the turkey, and it poaches the inside of the turkey so that it steams the turkey
Yes.
on the inside. And of course, we invented different marinades to be injected in the turkey.
Now, did you invent these yourself? You have
Yeah.
patented it, and did
No, we didn't patent it.
you did not?
I should have.
You should have,
As
right.
it turns out, I learned very quickly that once you introduce something into the marketplace, you can't go back and patent it. Once it's out there,
Yes,
it's out
it's
there.
common property.
It's
then.
common property then. And so after about 3 or 4 years, I started to get a lot of competition.
Yes.
Originally, I had the whole market to myself,
Yes.
but eventually it got more and more, and the prices dropped, of course.
Yes,
Then
yes.
all of a sudden the margins start to drop and that sort of thing. But that's the way it always happens.
Yes, but that was a very successful venture starting right here in Macon, Georgia. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Wow, wow. Did your wife play a key role in this? But let's give her some credit here.
Well, not only did she play a key role, she actually invented a lot of the stuff. The turkey has a rod that runs up through the turkey and a loop on the top, and then a hanger that you lift it in and out of the oil with.
Yes.
Well, in those days, there was a factory in Edenton called Al-Anon Factory, and they manufactured aluminum cookware.
Yes.
And so we went over, and my wife saw that they made a coffee maker, a commercial coffee maker with a front handle that I'm
Yes.
sure you've seen on buffet lines.
Yes.
and it was very similar to what we needed. So we took the interior piece of the coffee maker, bent it at the top, and my wife said, well, why don't we take a coat hanger and then we could lift it in and out.
Yes.
So that's how those pieces were invented for the turkey fryer.
Now, could you do something, I mean, with a chicken like this, or the chickens work? I mean, any...
You could do multiple chickens at the same time, or you could do one chicken, and it's fried.
It's okay. And this turns out to be pretty ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Am I right? If after this invention,
yes.
So this is a common thing in America.
We
now.
sold it to probably 50% of the major retailers in the United States, from Sears to Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, Kroger, every grocery chain. We sold them all over.
Wow, that's a great American success story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, you did this, and you sold the company.
Yes, I did, to the factory in China that made the cookers for me. When I couldn't make any more myself, they bought my entire operation.
Is that right? Well, is it a Chinese government thing, a private entrepreneur there? Or?
Well, it privatized just as we were doing that, so
Really?
that they could do that individually.
Yes.
And so the Pan Sin Manufacturing Company,
Yes.
which had 1,300 employees,
Yes.
he came over, and the owner did, and Mr. O, and we met. And in fact, I rented him an apartment here in Macon.
Really?
And he would come over 3 or 4 times a year, and he bought the company. But unfortunately, he made all of the $50 million worth of charcoal grills for Walmart. Well, Walmart's famous for lowering the price every year. Well, they finally got past the point where he could no longer take a discount.
Yes.
So they came to him and they said, if you do not do this, we're going to pull the $50 million worth of business.
Yes.
And I warned him. I said,
Right.
you need to figure it out, because if you don't, they're going to pull the business. Well,
Yes.
when they did, it bankrupted him.
Really? Wow.
So 2 years after he bought my company, he declared bankruptcy because of Walmart.
Is that right? Well,
That was the end
How
of it.
did, China is this huge world power. It's growing, and there's enormous wealth creation there. How did this person, presumably, no one had any money, am I right, in China, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, or the government was a communist country. How did all this hatch out? How did Mr. O get his money? How did that happen?
He owned a packaging company. He made the first boxes in China that were fully labeled all the way around the packaging.
Yes.
And he was very successful at it, and he accumulated the money
Yes.
by selling to other manufacturers that needed packaging.
Yes.
And eventually he bought this huge factory that did metal welding and stamping and with the money. And that's how he started.
It must have been. What about the clash of legal systems? In other words, the Chinese have their own legal system. Did you encounter issues with the Chinese government in these transactions?
Oh, yes.
We're in this world. You're sort of a person that's an interesting person has this kind of world experience. But how did you find the mercantile arrangements with the Chinese?
In the very beginning, there were 2 presidents to every factory.
Yes.
The guy that you met and the guy from the Communist Party in the back room.
Yes.
So we would sit at the table, we'd have the meetings, we'd discuss everything and negotiate what we were going to do. Then he would excuse himself.
Yes.
He would go to the back room, he'd stay a half an hour or an hour, and he'd come back out and he'd say, yes, we can do this, or no, we can't do this, but we can do this. But the gentleman from the Communist Party in the back room made the decision. He was just the front man.
And then the situation changed as time went along?
Oh, very quickly. When China privatized, we took the very first airplane into mainland China that was privately owned and not owned by the Chinese government.
Yes.
And when we got there, it was every factory was for sale. I was offered in one of the provinces, and it was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my life. They offered me the electrical opportunity to own the electricity for one of the provinces in China for $300,000.
Well, what year was that, may I ask?
1984.
Wow. You were in China in 1984.
Yes.
And well, what would have happened? I mean, would they have taken
I'd
it
be a
from you?
billionaire
Well,
today.
of course. But do you think property would be safe? I mean, one of the extraordinary mysteries in the world is what's happening in China. I mean, it's very
Well,
is
not
it-
to me. I see it.
You say, do you think it's a successful thing? Is it a soap bubble?
Well, first of all, the Taiwanese, that little island,
yes,
owns most of the factories in mainland China.
yes,
When the communist government decided that they were going to sell off every asset that they had,
yes,
the rich men from Taiwan
yes,
went into China and for 2 cents on the dollar bought up all of their factories, all of their assets that they had. So
Wow.
they in turn run those businesses, even though they're enemies, the Taiwanese
Yes.
and the Chinese. The Taiwanese own the businesses
Yes.
in mainland
Well,
China.
that's a little known fact. So actually, the overseas in general, the overseas Chinese, maybe there were some people from Singapore or Hong Kong or maybe even from the U.S. that had connections, but mainly apparently from Taiwan. But
Yeah.
they're the people that came in and could speak the language and knew the culture, and they just got it at a very low price.
Yes.
Well, now, I've been to China, recently, and it's just an extraordinary
It's unbelievable.
situation. I was there, I don't know, 20 or some odd years ago, and it was certainly a little rough then, but I was back several times recently, and it's unbelievable. I fear, or I wonder about a soap bubble. Do you think from your knowledge of the system there, do you think it's a sustainable kind of thing, or there are all the vagaries of the legal system and the taxes, and is this sort of a real competitor for the U.S., or is it something destined to
They're
not
here
work?
to stay.
Yes.
Now they're manipulating the currency in order to keep the business because
Yes.
there are other players out there, India and other people that want to have some of that business.
Yes,
But they're holding on to it. And because of who the ownership is in China,
yes,
which is the stockbrokers in New York,
yes, right, many of them,
they
yes.
control China too.
Yes.
It's not just controlled by the Chinese. The Chinese government runs the infrastructure, but certainly the businesses run the same all over the world. It's run by the people, the billionaires.
Yes, yes. Now, there's been a lot of, I guess, at least coming from China, stories of corruption. So the government apparently is cracking down on corruption. I mean, did you encounter that? Was the feeling that in order to just function there was a lot of knavery, and did you ever encounter that?
I never had to deal with payola.
Yes,
Uh,
yes,
that was never a part. I was such a small player
yes,
that in China that that was never an issue. They were just hungry to have the business.
yes,
When I started the manufacturing in China, they were paying the employees 11 cents an hour.
yes,
And when I sold the company, they were up to $4 an hour.
yes.
In just 10 years, they went from 11 cents to $4 an hour.
Now, in one of the things one can wonder why China's doing so well is what about the U.S. tariff policy, or I mean, was there a difficulty about that, or our trade agreements with the
Well,
Chinese?
we just signed a trade agreement with China,
Yes.
reducing or eliminating the tariffs, which is going to really give them an unfair advantage.
So you're familiar with this? Is, I guess President Obama did this. Is that trans-Pacific arrangements, and the idea is supposed to benefit the U.S. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, I have very strong
Well,
comments
make
about
some.
that. He made a huge mistake.
Yes.
The Chinese, we play on a level playing field. They
Yeah.
play on both sides, and it's not. They don't care. I mean, they'll tell him what he wants to hear, but the reality is that they are going to dominate, and they have 1 billion people. When my wife and I first went into China, they had one skyscraper.
Yes.
And John Portman built it from
Really?
Atlanta,
Wow.
Georgia.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And when we went back, they had 10,000. And I couldn't believe it.
Yes.
Well, when you have that kind of growth, it's pretty hard to stop because it's feeding itself. In other words, building more and more and more and more in the country. They don't need to rely so much on people outside the country anymore. Their consumption in motor vehicles will soon surpass ours.
Well, now, just to look at why China's done so well. So some things might be that you could make the case they got their start by the tariff policy. They're able, the jobs that went there, 11 cents an hour, you can certainly import things much at a quite reduced price. You mentioned Walmart. One of the things that keeps the U.S. inflation rate down or whatever, bringing a lot of products in, it drops prices, all this but then apparently the advantage is diminishing, but it's still there. There's also been, I guess, some at least allegations of, and you made it, of currency manipulation. So do you think the government, as they dropped was the renminbi, is that what they have? They dropped the renminbi exchange. Yeah, they dropped that recently. And then you don't think they would necessarily play fair with any kind of mercantile agreement with the U.S. With different you don't believe that would happen?
No, I mean they're going to survive, whatever it takes to survive. They look at business a little differently than we do in this country. Making the money is more important than how it's made.
Yes,
I think is the nicest way to put it.
Yes,
and besides, we are such a small part of the countries in the world that they serve. You
yes.
have to understand, they serve all of the Arab nations, Africa, Russia. They send their products all over the world. Our importance in China, we're still the biggest, but we don't have to be. In other words, they can sell their products all over the world. And what's so nice about them is they have the technology.
Yes.
And we don't have to pay for the startup charges. In other words, every time I wanted to put a new machine in my factory,
right.
I had to buy the machinery, I had to put it into place, I had to learn how to operate it and everything. Well, they have all that. It's already there, the finest, and they can do it.
Yes.
You just give them an idea of what you want or a drawing, and 2 weeks later, here comes a sample.
How about the work ethic in China? How did you find the work ethic? I mean, you have people
no
with drug problems
or
they're whatever. I mean,
well, first
they're really
of all,
pretty motivated.
Well, not only are they motivated, but they live on the compounds. They furnish the housing for them and the food, and they're allowed to go home for 3 or 4 holidays a year. So they live in the dormitories, ladies and men. They get up, have their meals there. They go to work, and they work 12 hours, and then they have the evenings off after dinner, and then they get up and they do it again. They do it 7 days a week.
Wow, 7 days a week.
7 days a week, and they work around. Then they go home and they'll shut the factory down and go home for a week for everybody to go see their families, and then they go back to work.
Wow. So you can look at some of the Chinese mercantile advantages. That's obviously the work ethic is one. Another one might be that you mentioned the level of equipment. If you just start right away in the 21st century, you don't have to go through all the other industrial revolutions. You don't have to do this. You don't have to put landlines in for your telephones. And when you put a skyscraper up, you know the most effective and efficient way to put one up. So the transformation is made much, much easier because of their access to contemporary Western technology. They just take it just like that. And is that and that's a huge advantage, is it not?
Yes, and in order for us to catch up.
How would you suppose we could do that? How would we do that?
Well, it begins by leveling the playing field with tariffs.
Yes.
In other words, if the products from China cost 30% less, and we put a 30% tariff on all imports from China, then that gives the factory in Macon, Georgia, a fair chance to compete with the factory in Shanghai.
Yes.
So that's one way.
Yes.
The second way is for the government to have incentives for people to have businesses.
Yes.
As you know, Wall Street doesn't care where the money's made. They just want it to move around. They don't care if it's made in Africa or in China.
Yes.
Wall Street is not for the United States. They're for the world.
Yes.
And as a result, it really doesn't matter where the products are made.
Yes. Well, what about now the story about this tremendous trans-Pacific arrangement that's been touted by Washington is the idea that American products will go in there, that we'll make a lot of money out of this deal. Will the Chinese buy our things? Are we going to, and we have a comparative advantage, maybe, I don't know, maybe our computers are really good and the Chinese will buy our computers. I don't know what they are, pecans. I know they like pecans. In fact, Dr. Kim Johnson has a pecan arrangement, but my partner, and he wants to sell his pecans to China. I'll say that, but can you? Is that really a deal? Can they really buy our? Is it going to work for us?
No,
it's not. Why not?
No, there isn't a thing that we make that they can't make as well and cheaper.
Yes,
because of the cost of making things in America, the cost of living.
Yes.
Our employees can't work for the wages that they work for, and their productivity, well, you know, they don't take their cell phones to work in
yes.
China. I mean, they go to work, and they work until they drop. And
yes.
That's a totally different work ethic.
Yeah, another thing I think is there, at least in medicine, the retirement age is 60. I was impressed. I mean, I don't know what it is for, you know, industrial workers, but the idea is that after you're 60, you know, maybe you're slightly less vigorous, I hope not, but in any event, the workers all stop then. So you have a very young, motivated workforce right in the prime of life, and there's so many people there, they can just do that. They can just get least productive.
First of all, families live in compounds over there.
Yes.
And they'll have one television set for the entire family, and there'll be 4 generations living in there, and the young generations support the older generations.
Yes, and they have that Confucius kind of viewpoint.
Yes.
Also, they have sort of a hierarchy, do they not? The individual is of less consequence there as contrasted in the U.S. Is that a fair statement? I mean, the idea is that the Confucius kind of viewpoint is you genuflect to your elders. You take.
And that's still the case. The elderly still have the power in the family.
Yes, yes,
yes.
And so there's the level of politeness, and in general, it's quite a different kind of deal. The individual is quite not as important. Well, one thing, at least in my stay or knowledge of China, is the government has this enormous problem. It sounds like the Chinese are going to be like just take over the world. But they do have all of these rural people, 800 million of them, those former pig farmers, you could say, and integrating those people into the industrial system. I mean, they're going to be, any comments on that? All the tension that might start to happen. And the other thing is people get pretty westernized, or is the government stopping them?
Well, first of all, 80% of the people in China live within 30 miles of the coast.
Yes.
That's where all the factories are,
yes.
That's where all the production is. And they actually have rules to keep those people out on the farms because their big Achilles heel is food.
Yes.
You have to feed 1 billion people every day, and they need the farmers.
Yes.
And so they actually travel from state to state in the United States. In China, you have to have a passport to go from one state to the next state because they want to keep them out in the rural areas.
Now, just I don't know if you saw much of this, but their policy, one child per family. Did you observe that, or how about the social tensions that causes? That must be
there's no social tensions there. In fact, the population all over the world's dropping. Everybody's having, in Denmark, they're actually paying people, and in Russia now, they're paying people to have children because there's no young people coming along to support them.
In China, didn't they have a one
it
child?
Costs $20,000 to have a second child.
Really?
You just pay the government and you can have a second child.
Wow.
The rich people can have all the children they want.
Right, but not the poor people.
No, they cannot.
How about just getting into our conversation, but the idea is, I think, the communist flag, they've got the different sort of workers, the stars that are around there. They have the workers, the peasants, whatever, the army, the party. And it's a communist country. How is this transformation occurring from the time of Mao, this extraordinary world-class event that's happening? Do you think that transformation can continue without issues?
I would say that China is becoming more of a democracy than we are.
Why do you say that?
Because the money rules the country. The work and the labor rules the country. It's the production that runs the country, not the Communist Party. They run the infrastructure, but they're evolving into a democracy.
Well, so your view with our final question is, what should the U.S. do with China as we go forward? Tariffs, respect them, do a deal with them?
Tariffs.
Tariffs?
And bring the jobs back home. It's easy. Make me the president and I can fix it in 10 minutes.
Okay, well, Jack, maybe we can do that. It's been great talking to you. You've obviously had a great career. What an interesting time you've had of it. It's very uncommon to hear such a story. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.